Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm delighted to have secured this debate on banking in North Ayrshire, although I really wish it wasn't necessary, and I should say in advance that I apologise for the croaky sound of my voice as I've struggled through this speech, because Mr Speaker, I've been tabling for this debate since November, when the closures of RBS branches in my constituency in Kilwinning and Saltcoats were first announced, and I had either the fortune or the misfortune to have secured it on the very week when I lose my voice. So you can make of that what you will.
RBS will be relieved.
Since November, Mr Speaker, I have spoken in 3 debates on bank closures. I've written several letters to the Chief Executive of RBS, Ross McEwen, and I have raised the matter with the Chair of the Scottish Affairs Committee, which has summoned the Chief Executive of RBS. And I've also held street stalls with SNP local councillors and activists and volunteers on countless Saturdays in the affected town since Christmas, collecting signatures for a parliamentary petition protesting against these closures, which I will be presenting in this place in the coming weeks. The reason for all this activity, Mr Speaker, is because of the real anger and betrayal felt by the people of Kilwinning, Saltcoats and Kilbirnie at the loss of these banks in their towns. RBS is a bank that belongs to them. They own it via the government. A bank that was bailed out from its own mistakes and mismanagement by their taxes. Now this same bank is leaving these communities without a backward glance, without any sense of social responsibility towards the very communities upon whose taxes the bank's very continued existence relied. Although many communities in Scotland will be left without a bank following the latest announcement of closures, in my own constituency it brings the total number of towns with no bank to a staggering 6. The towns of Dalry, Stevenston, West Kilbride, Ardrossan and Beath no longer have a bank. And now, after these latest round of closures, should they go ahead, we can add Kilwinning to that list. Kilwinning will be a town of over 16,000 people with no banking facilities.
Absolutely shocking.
And it would be funny if it were not so appalling and ridiculous. I honestly, Mr Speaker, do not think any other constituency in the United Kingdom has been so adversely, so cruelly hit. Indeed, the banks are stampeding out of Ayrshire at an alarming, at a staggering rate. Of course, vowing not to...
Lady, give way.
I will indeed.
I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady and I salute her courage in getting through the debate. Would she agree with me that rural areas are particularly badly hit by bank closures, such as those in North East Fife, where RBS closed all but one, leaving a huge commute for those who need banking services the most?
I do indeed, and that is something, Mr Speaker, that I'll return to later in my speech, about the fact that no cognizance has been shown of the consequences for communities that the banks are supposed to serve, without a backward glance. I will indeed.
We congratulate her on having a timely debate on the whole issue about banks. Not only does it affect places like Ayrshire, but it affects nationally. There is a trend of banks, particularly in countryside areas, for closures, and people are left to their own devices. They've got no way, as it were, of getting money or getting their gyro checks and things like that. So it's a national thing. And that's the thank you the public get for bailing the banks out in the first place.
Indeed, and the honourable gentleman has put his finger on the real source of the anger here, the sense of abandonment, the sense of being left to their own devices with no facilities, other facilities upon which to rely, despite the fact that the bank exists because the taxpayer made sure that it did. I will indeed.
Mr Speaker, thank you. And I congratulate the Honourable Lady in bringing forward this motion against tonight to be considered, and thank her for giving us a chance to participate as well in a small way. Does the Honourable Lady not agree that the fact that banking is increasingly moving online is hard for urban and indeed for rural communities in particular, who are geographically isolated from the physical bank and limited in terms of broadband provision from the internet banking that is touted? Does the Honourable Lady feel that this should be very clearly considered before any proposals for bank closures take place?
Yeah.
Indeed, and the comments the Honourable Gentleman makes, for which I thank him, go to the very heart of the issue of financial inclusion, social inclusion, and the point that he makes about digital exclusion. So these things have to be worked out together in some kind of organised fashion. Of course, vowing not to close the last bank in town is something which the RBS at one point in its history championed, but now which is twisting itself into all sorts of shapes to dissociate itself from that earlier promise. I suppose the appeal of the PR men for RBS found that vow very, very attractive, but now it seems that it's embarrassed by it and no longer holding to it. And we've heard a little bit tonight, Mr Speaker, about banking online. And we hear about this a lot. And we all accept that many people now choose to bank online. There's no dispute about that. And there's no argument about that. And for those who choose to bank online, if it suits their lifestyle and their needs, then good luck to them. But many do not bank online for a whole variety of reasons. And many, as the Honourable Gentleman said, choose not to do so because they are digitally excluded. It's a choice that they are not able to make. I will indeed.
Raised a very interesting point, because there is an issue, particularly in the countryside, as it were, in relation to broadband.
Indeed.
A lot of people have problems with BT and broadband, and that's an issue that ultimately denies people the opportunity, if they wish, to go online.
Yes, and the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right. The banks talk about online banking as though it's a choice. For many people, it is not a choice. They are digitally excluded. And many people, of course, may not be digitally excluded, but they may simply decide that online banking, for whatever reason, is not for them. And, Mr Speaker, for the record, I put myself in that category. I choose not to bank online. The point is, Mr Speaker, it should be up to the customer to choose how and when they bank. And it is not up to the banks to make that decision for us. But what we have now, Mr Speaker, is a situation, most cynically, where the banks have decided that those of us who have chosen not to bank online must be herded into that particular pen, despite our will. Well, indeed.
I congratulate and commend my honourable friend for securing the debate in the way that she's presenting her argument, which is very strong. Could you comment on the strength of feeling in North Ayrshire around the figures that have been released or haven't been released by RBS around the footfall figures in their branches? Because there's certainly a feeling in Airdrie, where they're trying to close one of my branches in Airdrie, that they have not provided sufficient or accurate information around justifying those closures, which is very concerning.
The Honourable Gentleman is absolutely correct, Mr Speaker. We all know, we've all seen in our own constituencies, the jiggery-pokery that has taken place with regard to the presentation of these figures, which do not reveal... I'm hoping that's the first time it's in Hansard. The jiggery-pokery around...
Third, the term used previously by the Honourable Gentleman Member for North East Somerset.
Thank you for that clarification, Mr Speaker. But we do know that there has been jiggery-pokery. There's been all sorts of nefarious goings-on about how these figures are presented. My colleagues are shouting the word "sleek it" to me, which may well indeed cover that particular practice that's going on. But the point is, it is not correct that customers are herded into the pen of online banking, a place where they have up to this point chosen or perhaps been unable to go. But we have been forced down this road by banks as they shut up shop. And if we insist that we do not want to bank online, the attitude from too many banks, and conversations I have had, Mr Speaker, with banking officials who shall remain nameless, the attitude, if people choose not to bank online, is for the banks collectively to shrug their shoulders and say, more or less, suit yourself, but we're still shutting your bank. I will indeed.
Could I thank you in several counts? Thank you for securing the debate. Thank you for the good work that you've done in your constituency to hold the RBS to account, yourself and your fellow councillors. And thank you for using the word jiggery-pokery that I can understand. But I'm left-handed, I'm for a different party here, sir. But would the honourable member join me in expressing dismay that none of the 10 banks that were given that reprieve were from Ayrshire, and indeed the 10-month reprieve is simply a stay of execution and is derisory for the people of Scotland. RBS could do better for the people that have been customers for generations to the RBS. It was a world leader, and it's let down the people who made the RBS.
That intervention, and he's right. The 10 banks that have been given a reprieve are not enough, and certainly, of course, I would be disappointed that none of them are in Ayrshire. I wish the banks that have been reprieved well. I wish we could add the other 52 earmarked for closure in Scotland to the list of reprieved banks, because if we could give a reprieve to the banks in my constituency, I'm quite sure that we would make every effort to persuade RBS thereafter that the reprieve was a permanent state. But obviously the goal would be to save every bank. But I'll come back to that later, because I see the Minister looking at me with a bit of alarm. But
No, he's not.
He doesn't care.
But the one question, Mr. Speaker, I would throw out there in terms of digital exclusion, the banks are often fond of telling us that we don't need to have our branches, we can bank online. And I would like to know what RBS in particular, who are behind these closures, I would like to know what their advice would be to customers who are digitally excluded. Where do they go when their last RBS in town closes? How do they access banking services? And we haven't even... I will indeed.
I thank the honourable member for giving way, and she's made an excellent speech. One of the things that RBS like to claim is they've got these mobile vans going around, one of which comes into my constituency of Dundee West, which has a rural part. Does my honourable member agree with me that, however, they often arrive for a very short period of time? They have steps to get in, so those who are infirm or disabled cannot get in. And when it's raining, you're standing there often for half an hour to get service soaked to the skin. And the very people who are not only digitally excluded are the very people who come for that essential service.
The honourable gentleman is absolutely correct. RBS have actually informed me that in my constituency, Kilwinning, Saltcoats and Kilburnie, that they will replace the branches with mobile banks. A completely, as the honourable gentleman said, a completely unsatisfactory situation. They are delayed by the weather, they are delayed by traffic, they are not disability compliant, and apparently the advice is that if you are disabled or immobile or have mobility impairment and you cannot access the physical mobile bank, then apparently the banking teller will come out and you can do your banking in the middle of the street. Shocking. Well, that's okay then. Shocking. Absolutely shocking.
Would the Honourable Lady?
I will indeed.
I thank Honourable Friend for giving way. She's making an extremely passionate speech. The All-Party Parliamentary Group for Disability that I chair is now going to be launching an inquiry into community banking for people with disabilities and mobility problems, because, like the Honourable Lady, my constituents who have mobility problems in Straven and Lesmahagle, where RBS plan to close the banks, feel particularly let down, and as though there will be no services which are appropriate and available.
Indeed, and that's something that I will be coming to in a little while, about the importance of providing accessible and sustainable banking services in all our communities, for the needs of all our communities. Those of us who can't get to the next town because of lack of our own transport, lack of public transport, or because of other mobility issues.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will indeed.
She's spoken about the impact of bank closures in rural areas, but does she agree with me also in outer-lying village areas in the city like Juniper Green in my constituency, where the Royal Bank of Scotland shut their branch last year? This has a real impact on small businesses on the high street, because if they take the auto teller away, then people will drive to the supermarket to get their cash out and spend their money at the supermarket rather than on the many vibrant small businesses that exist in places like Juniper Green in Edinburgh.
The honourable lady actually leads me very smoothly on to my next point. Although, of course, we're not just concerned about rural areas. Kilwinning could hardly, I think, by any stretch of the imagination, be called a rural area. But the point that the honourable lady makes about the effect on small businesses is extremely important, because we all know that small businesses, which are the backbone of our communities, the lifeblood of our communities, who keep the heart of our high streets beating, we all know that they work in an extremely challenging retail climate. And if local businesses, Mr. Speaker, cannot bank their takings at the end of the business day, then they incur additional insurance costs. I'll just finish this point. They either take their cash at the end of the business day home with them, because if the bank goes, there's no night safe. So they either take the cash home with them or they drive to the next town to bank their takings. Either way, their insurance costs go up. Now, for businesses that are already struggling on the cusp of survival, that could well be enough to tip several of them over the edge. And the support of banks in our towns can often prove critical for this reason for our small businesses. And let's not forget, everybody in this chamber, regardless of their political views, understands the importance of small businesses keeping our high streets alive.
Hear, hear. Thanks very much for that, and I'm using this adjournment because I've got 3 banks shutting down: Christon, Bellshill and Turnnockside. The Turnnockside's one local bank built by the community. When these banks opened up, it was local workers who built these banks. And you're spot on about local businesses, small businesses. It's usually staff who's got to take a large sum of money. Now, their alternative is to go to the post office. The post office is not equipped for it, and this is a very good debate. Thanks very much.
I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention. I really now need to make some progress because I know that the Minister is keen to respond. As for those...
I'm not going to get my intervention.
As for those living in towns affected by these closures, Kilwinning customers, Mr Speaker, have been advised that the nearest RBS following the closure of their branch is in Largs, an 18.8 miles round trip away. Saltcoats customers have been directed to Irvine, a 12.8 miles round trip away. And Kilwinning customers have also been directed to Irvine, a 6.8 mile round trip away. And this is simply not good enough when one considers that many of these customers don't have access to private transport. They will be at the mercy of local public transport in all weathers. So the elderly and the infirm will be left to fend for themselves as financial and social exclusion bites in their towns. Because what we're talking about is financial and social exclusion. These bank closures mean that the affected communities no longer have access to day-to-day essential banking services. And we've heard about the problems that mobile banks bring with them. They are simply not a solution to the problem of closing down the last bank in town in particular. They are a very poor substitute, and the people of Kilwinning, Saltcoats and Kilburnie expect better, and they deserve better. Banks have shown and are showing increasingly that they have no sense of service to our communities. And tonight I am calling on the Minister to establish and enforce a guaranteed minimum level of service provision for essential banking services, recognising the importance of continued access to banking for our communities. Surely it is now time, Mr Speaker, given that banks are riding roughshod over our communities with no sense of service or responsibility, for a guaranteed minimum level of service provision for essential banking services to be put in place. Now, I know that the Prime Minister has said in the Commons and repeatedly that branch closures are operational matters for the banks, but really, Mr Speaker, that isn't good enough. RBS is still owned, 73% owned by the taxpayer, so this is a very, very bitter pill to swallow. And in addition, we know the UK Government retains all legislative and regulatory powers in respect to financial services. So the UK Government does indeed have the authority to call a halt to this devastating round of closures, whilst banks, stakeholders and the UK and Scottish Governments can consider how best to take account of the obligation to banking customers and our communities. And whatever the banks may say, they do have such an obligation to our communities. They have a financial, a service and a moral obligation. In addition to the UK Government arguing that these are operational decisions for banks, there is a precedent, and the Minister knows there's a precedent, because George Osborne, the previous Chancellor, kind of let the cat out of the bag here, because he confirmed that during his time as Chancellor, his consent, Mr Speaker, was sought by RBS over the departure of previous CEO Stephen Hester. That means, Mr Speaker, the UK Government right now could reject any RBS closures unless and until impact assessments have been carried out, and should require RBS to ensure that practical and sustainable alternative banking services are put in place before any closures are signed off. It really is time to call on RBS management to reverse these planned closures. The UK Government, the Minister tonight, has a responsibility to demonstrate he is standing up for our communities on this most important issue. The SNP Westminster leader, the member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber, has persuaded RBS to reprieve 10 branches across Scotland until impact assessments have been carried out. I wish those communities well, but it does nothing to soften the hammer blow to the towns in my constituency, who face losing their banks, and for Kilwinning in particular, it has to be said, which will lose its last bank branch. In the past, the Minister has suggested that customers who are not happy can move their accounts to another bank. What does he suggest that the people of Kilwinning do when there is no bank for them to move to within a reasonable distance? Of course, now, customers are also being advised to move their accounts to the post office. Well, Mr Speaker, I recall 10 years ago, under another government, I recall collecting petition signatures to save post offices in my constituency, when whole swathes of them were being closed down in my constituency. And post offices bolted onto the back of the local spar simply does not provide the range of services or privacy that customers need and deserve. So I appeal in good faith to the Minister to ensure that these closures are halted. The RBS is ordered to halt these closures and carry out full impact assessments on the communities affected. All the communities affected want nothing less, and the people in the towns of Kilwinning, Kilbirnie and Saltcoats deserve nothing less. And I ask the Minister today, is he going to stand with RBS management, or is he going to stand with the communities affected and the communities of Kilwinning, Kilbirnie and Saltcoats in particular? I urge him to do the right thing and stand up for our community.
Economic Secretary to Treasury John Glenn to reply.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I would like to sincerely commend the member for North Ayrshire and Arran for securing this debate. She has spoken once again very powerfully on behalf of her constituents, and I know this is an issue that she is passionate about, and the RBS executives will note that there are over 20 members of Parliament here. A number have spoken, and they will want to reflect on the views that have been expressed. Since becoming Economic Secretary on the 9th of January, I've had the privilege of responding to a number of debates on bank branches closures across the UK and in specific local areas. And in each one, I've heard important stories about what the local bank branch can mean to the community, and I've heard that again this evening. And it means a great deal in terms of practical ideas to access services, and I will turn to that point in more detail. But it can also be banks can be at the heart of how people feel about their local high street and the future of their community. And putting my Treasury responsibilities aside, I myself visited a bank in my own constituency that is facing closure in exactly the same way that the Honourable Lady set out. And I had to sit down with the bank manager and go through the same sorts of arguments. But they are commercial decisions. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that. No, I'm not going to give way because I've only got 8.5 minutes. And if I'm going to do justice to all the points that have been raised, I will come on and speak to the points. No, I won't. The government is very aware of the issues that have been raised, and I want to now talk about the challenges that are facing the banking sector and facing our communities at the same time. I think in a previous debate the Honourable Lady has said that she does not bank online. That is her choice. But whatever her personal preferences and whatever our personal preferences, banking is going through a period of unprecedented technological change. Consumer behaviour is changing significantly, and banks are having to adapt to those shifting patterns of behaviour. And the decisions that they're making are sometimes not popular, and I understand why. But the Honourable Lady will be well aware that those decisions are not for government. And the point was made about the previous Chancellor, the former member for Tattons, signing off on the chief executive post. There's a big difference between signing off on the strategic leadership and getting involved in day-to-day commercial decisions. Each bank's branch strategy. I'm not going to give way, so I'm just going to continue. So there we are. Each bank's branch strategy, including whether to open or close individual branches, is for the management of that bank to determine. I understand that is frustrating. It's frustrating to all of us where we face this issue. And the government rightly does not intervene in these commercial decisions, and nor does the government manage the RBS group. RBS is headed by its own board, which is responsible for the strategic direction and management decisions. And all businesses strive to deliver for their customers, but they need to be able to plan for the future and make the changes where needed. And these are complex commercial decisions. RBS have made their decisions in line with their commercial strategy, and no, I won't. The Honourable Lady and her colleagues are entitled to ask questions, as they've done very effectively this evening, and to press RBS on their rationale. And while I don't agree that the government should or could cancel RBS's decision, I'm certain that the Honourable Lady's views, expressed here again this evening on behalf of her constituents, will have been heard by RBS. So, on the government's role with respect to the Post Office, I think previously the Honourable Lady has said that the government has not lifted a finger to help. I must beg to differ. On this side of the House, we are taking action, and I welcome the opportunity to reiterate that this evening. For those who still need or want to bank in person, we have helped to expand and improve face-to-face banking services at the Post Office. And, Mr. Speaker, there are 11,600 Post Office branches in the UK, 24 of them in the Honourable Lady's constituency. There is a post office in the 3 towns that she's mentioned, in Kilwinning and Kilburnie and Saltcoats. Indeed, across the UK, 99% of personal customers and 95% of business customers can do their day-to-day banking there. And in response to the member for Edinburgh South West, who was concerned about the issue of, I'm going to respond to the points raised, I've got 5 minutes. Small businesses and cash lodgements. The RBS Bank do offer cash courier services, and Post Office can accept up to 20,000 without 2,000 without prior notice, and further arrangements can be made on a case-by-case basis. And as the Honourable Lady has mentioned, certainly previously, this might not be a service that people are familiar fully with yet, but I believe it does offer a valuable alternative. And people are adjusting to the reality of what can be obtained from the Post Office. It's important that people who can benefit from these services know about them. So I will keep pushing both the banks and the Post Office to do more to raise awareness of the expanded services that they jointly offer. It is important that they make this case proactively and publicly, and we should spread the message far and wide. We can all do our day-to-day banking at the Post Office, and we in this House can help reassure people who may be worried about this issue. Now, in terms of the oversight of banks, where banks do decide to close branches, the government's ongoing support for the industry's access to banking standard is also making a real difference. All the major high street banks have signed up to the standard. It commits banks to a number of outcomes when a bank closes. First, they will give at least 3 months' notice, and I think in RBS's case, certainly in some cases, they've given 6 months' notice. Second, they will consider what services can still be provided locally and communicate clearly with customers about alternative ways to bank. And third, they will ensure that there is support available for customers who need extra help to bank online or to access services at the local post office. The standard is not just a list of outcomes, it does have teeth. It has teeth because the Lending Standards Board monitors and enforces the standard. They are actively monitoring how RBS and other banks fulfil their obligations to their customers when branches close. They have a range of tools and sanctions at their disposal should a bank fall short. And I know that they're very open to talking to individual members on behalf of their communities, and I would encourage the Honourable Lady and her colleagues to do so if she has concerns about the steps the RBS is taking or not taking in her constituency. The access to banking standard is the practical way to shape a bank's approach to local areas, and I would encourage all members of the House, on all sides of the House, to ensure their community is aware and able to engage with the bank directly. Now, one of the other issues is about access to cash, and several members have mentioned this. The government continues to work with industry to ensure the provision of widespread free access to cash, and in December, Link, the organisation which runs the ATM network in the UK, committed to protecting all free-to-use ATMs which are a kilometre or more from the next or nearest free-to-use ATM. This is a welcome strengthening of their financial inclusion programme, and one that I hope will reassure members across the House. The Honourable Lady fights hard for her constituents in North Ayrshire, and as have a number of members who have spoken this evening. and I am sure their concerns have been heard. We all understand the frustration and disappointment caused by bank closures. But, Mr. Speaker, these are not government decisions. The government's policy remains clear. RBS are responsible for these decisions, and RBS must defend them. Banking is changing rapidly. We cannot deny that reality. But the government does not believe the government does believe that banks must support communities across the UK when their local branches close. That is a dialogue that we're all deeply engaged with, trying to find the best solution for individual communities. In this place, we can help to draw attention to these issues and work constructively to help our constituents access the services they need. And for my part, I will keep pushing for everyone to be able to access the banking services they need wherever they live.